Hey guys, welcome back to Mr. H Makes. This week we're going to be continuing with the Make Movies in Unreal series, and we're going to be covering cameras, the various different types of rigs you can use, and also we'll go into detail on the tips and tricks you can use when it comes to cinematography in Unreal, how you can tweak various settings to get the shots that you really want. So I'm going to start by showing you the usual tracks that I add to Sequencer. Basically the aperture, the focal length, and also manual focus. These are the three I most often use. There are a lot of other things that you can add, but for a start, I think these are quite good. You can also check your manual focus distance by using the debug plane, that purple element that denotes the distance your focus is at. In a previous video, which I'll link to on the right above, I showed you how you can keyframe the camera to get the kind of camera movement that you're after. Don't forget to unlock the camera. You basically just keyframe the location, your start position and your end position. And there was a little trick how to get the camera moving if it doesn't appear to be moving when you keyframe it, and that basically was to manually drag the location. The other tip was also to double check that you weren't working on the wrong transform, because sometimes it appears below the first transform, but if you haven't given enough screen space to your sequencer window, then sometimes you can miss it. But yeah, have a look below the scale spinner on the first transform where I've indicated. And you can also use the curve editor to smoothen out or speed up your camera moves. I go into this in a bit more detail in the other video that I've linked to, but I thought I would just include it here. So in this case, yeah, I am highlighting the frames, and I'm going to apply a curve to get more of an easing out motion to the camera, so that it kind of slows down and settles on the character in the foreground. So conversely, if you want to not have easing in and easing out, you just use a more linear curve track. So you can also use the same sort of technique to do fly-throughs. So if you want to kind of drone, a lazy sort of drone footage kind of thing, you would use the same keyframing method. So here you can see a good example of the transform for the camera appearing slightly below. So I'm using that. Don't forget to make sure that your auto keyframe is on. That will make life a lot easier for you. and you just pretty much keyframe where you want the camera, the roll, the pitch and the yaw that you want the camera to have to kind of achieve that lazy flying drone kind of thing. I mean, in theory you could imitate a dragon's flight, you know, using the same kind of technique. So those two methods were kind of free flow methods. This is where you can actually use a typical camera rig rail, which imitates the real world method that they would do this on set. You know, you put down some rails and then you run a camera along it to achieve, you know, various camera moves. I think this way, although it's a bit more tedious at times, it is a good way to get circular movement on a track. Sometimes it's not great doing the freeform movement if you want to do this kind of thing. The best way to do it though is to have 2 points or less points. So I removed one so that I can use the Bezier curve to pull out a better, sort of more fluid curve, which is what I'm doing here. And by having 2 points, you have a smoother track. So, you know, some people might prefer this method to do things rather than just having a freeform approach. So I'm just setting up a sequence. And I'm adding various actors to the sequence, well, in particular the rig rail. And of course you've got to add a camera to that to get your shot. Basically what you do is you parent the camera to the rail, which is just done by dragging one onto the other. And I'm just zeroing out the camera to start at the beginning. So you can dictate the position of the camera by specifying where its current position on the rail is, and you can keyframe those as well. So I'm just adding the camera there too. So at the moment it's on the ground, so you're not going to see very much, so we can move that up. There's a number of ways you can do this. You can either move the whole rail up or the camera in relation to the rail. So I am selecting the camera and I'm attaching the camera rig rail to it, and that allows me to add the track. In fact, I can just click on that keyframe icon there. And have it animated in the sequencer. And obviously we still need to raise that camera a bit and also have it track the character, so we can set the camera settings to have it look at the actor. You can select it by using the eyedropper tool, so now the camera should follow the actor. So now we can play with the rotation offsets to get the angle and the framing that we want. Or you can just raise the whole rail itself. But this is, up to your own preference as to what you want to achieve. So that gives you an idea of what you can do. So now just select the camera cut to view it, and then I just run a quick test, and straight away we can see we're having some sort of problem here. It's not really doing what it's supposed to do. So I'm just trying to have a static model to test it. Previously I had an animation on it. I'm just doing some troubleshooting. See, it seems to follow the model. Which it does what it's supposed to do. So the problem seems to be with the animation, and I scratched my head over this for a bit, but I'm just putting it here so that if you come across this problem as well, you'll know what's going on. When in the viewport it seems to follow your character, but when you actually take a test movie of it, it doesn't. So basically what was happening was during the animation, my character was moving out of frame. So the target was not following the animation. It was just sort of focused on the original position of the static position. I mean, I've seen a few tutorials where people do this and they focus on a static image and everything's hunky-dory. So of course I had to push it a bit, and I came across these issues, which is good because then I discovered about offsetting and how you can use offsets to track your moving characters. So in this case, that glowing cube is what you need to use to have your camera manually follow your animation. I mean, there may be a better, more automatic way to do this, but this is what I found works. If you have a better way, please let me know in the comments below. So basically you end up keyframing the offset so that your tracking works better. And as I say, if your character was in a static position, you would need to do all of this, but in this case, you need to use an offset. Can be a bit fiddly, but ultimately you get the shot that you need. And of course, in theory, you could smoothen the transition between the frames using the curve editor. But anyway, as we see there, we've fixed that issue. So now everything renders out properly. So the other real world camera counterpart is the crane. So basically you use the same sort of methods that we did for the rig rail. You position the crane, you animate it the way that you want it to go, and then you parent the camera to it, and any offsets you need to do, you have to keyframe manually. So I'm just getting the position of the crane here. And to be honest, I prefer doing this the sort of free-form method instead of using the crane, because I find it quicker at the end of the day. The rig rail, on the other hand, I think gives better, superior smoother circular motion. Although, I guess in some ways the crane may do too. I think if you're doing like product shots and things like that, you would stick to using these real world counterparts. So yeah, basically I've just added a camera to that in the same way. And in this case, while the camera moved on the rig rail, the camera tends to be in a more static position, and it's the arm of the crane moving around that gives you the motion that you need. And yeah, just as in the other rig rail method, I'm just following the same procedure really. Just adding the rig rail to the camera there. And then keyframing the various things that I need. So the arm length. And of course you've got the pitch and the yaw that you can do as well. Targeting the camera to the actor. And then we can start looking at the offsets. So a quick word on camera cuts. I mean, these are basically how you could edit your movie within Unreal. To set them up, you click on the plus camera icon in the camera cuts section, and then you select the camera or binding that you want to cut to. I usually take it out to DaVinci Resolve it, but technically if you organize your camera cuts, you can select different cameras in one take, and this depends on the position of where your camera cut begins and ends. So you would select your camera cut that way, and of course that green line and the red line indicate you're in and out, or what's going to be recorded. So yeah, that was just a quick test to check the movie. So there's the crane, and then the camera cut moves to the rail that we did earlier. So at this stage, I thought I would talk a little bit about viewports. Usually what I would do is I would specify or add another viewport, and you can pick the actual camera you want to see in that viewport, and I would have that on a second monitor, because sometimes the more space you have, the better. And if you're using the Cinecamera, you get some additional options available on your viewport. I mentioned earlier that there are some advantages of using the Cinecamera Actor over the normal Camera Actor. Basically, it gives you a few more viewing options when you're playing back stuff in the viewport. It also, I believe, I'm not entirely sure on this, but I believe it also gives you more options in sequencer. You can add more tracks, different elements there. But probably most importantly to real world camera work, it also allows you to determine what your safe areas are. And also various methods to aid composition. Like if you follow your rule of thirds, that kind of thing. So you can also add a level sequence by just going to the Cinematics tab above. This is a different workflow from using the tape recorder, and it's probably a bit simpler, and it's the way I started. And then I eventually moved to tape recorder because I use some live link stuff. But yeah, so this way you can also create your sequence and then just add your various actors to it. So I mentioned earlier that these are my three sort of go-to settings, and I'll just go over it again how I add them, just via the track plus sign there. So you see manual focus is a major setting that I use, or a frequent setting, and you can adjust it and keyframe it from the details panel as well. Now, changing your sensor width and height will allow you to have a more cinematic end product. So yeah, 50 by 20 is quite a go-to for a few people to give that cinematic proportion. But again, that's up to you. you can have all the different options there. You can also add the aperture just by clicking on a keyframe in the details panel, and also the focal length, so you don't have to add it via the track method. So once again, yeah, you would use the debug plane to show where you're focusing, and you can keyframe that, or you can select the automatic method, but I like using the manual method. Gives you a nice depth of field if you play around with the aperture. So you can see the background blurring with your aperture. Another quick tip that I find quite useful is when I want to test animations, I use the simulation mode, which you can access via the play button, you see there. And then because the usual mode would be to just play it in the editor, which can be a bit cumbersome because every time you press play, you go and view it like so. Whereas if you use the simulation or simulate, which is also Alt S, you can just view it in the editor. And more importantly, you can just view other animations, quite quickly, and you can decide like, oh, okay, this is the animation I want to be using, or that one's not so good. And I usually try multiple animations and think, oh, okay, yeah, that's the one. Because the alternative is to click on those, double click on those animations and go and view them in the animation browser, which is like, more interface taken up. All right, and that is all for this week's episode. In the next episode, we will look more at setting up a head cam using blueprints, and we'll cover the camera shake and also a bunch of post effects that you can do using cameras in Unreal. So until then, you've been watching Mr. H Makes, and this is Mr. H signing off. Hope you have a good week ahead, and see you in the next one.